Hello, welcome back to the channel. So with the release of Ceredra, there has been a lot of discussion about tier lists and if certain characters deserve to be higher up or not, or what characters are actually good. And I think it has kind of shown why tier lists don't really work and why I think people take them a bit too serious. For a couple of reasons. One is I think people just take them way too much at face value, where if a character isn't tier 0, then they're just bad. Just because the character like Fei Xiao isn't as good as she does not make her bad at all. She can still clear content perfectly fine. Same goes for a bunch of 2.x characters, when I say a character is bad, it is because I have a problem with their actual kit themselves. I don't care if they're top tier or if they're F tier. My problem was mainly just with their kit. My problem with Sealy isn't that she's lower on the tier list. If she was lower on the tier list and felt fine to play, I wouldn't have a problem. The problem is that her kit is just really outdated. Archer just does everything that she wants to do, but just way better. However, I do think some people do kind of take it too far in the other direction, where just because you can make a character work, then they're just fine and they don't have any problems. Which I think is also just as bad. There's a reason that the devs are doing buffs. It's because a lot of the older characters' kits, especially the 1.0 characters, are just outdated. I think tier lists can give you a good general idea of what's good and what's not. And I don't think you should just ignore them completely. But you also shouldn't just be oh, these characters are good and these characters are bad. Also, just no one is ever going to agree what characters should be where, because it really just depends on what you're basing it off of. Are you basing it off of how good those characters are in their specific niches, high ceilings mainly being good for Dot and not really that much else, and Ceredra mainly being just good with Finon, or just how good they are in general, Trippy being good on almost any team you put her in. Since, at least to me, if a character is really niche, then I think that makes them not as good. Since, yeah, that might be really good in the niche that they fill, but that just makes them not really as much worth pulling, since if you don't have the characters that go with them, then it's why would you pull for them, Which, to be fair, I think it is fine to have some characters like that, where that just feel not as much must pulls. I mean, that is one reason why Sunday is so insane, since he fills, niches of summons and energy teams, but is also just a really good general support as well. 2. A lot of the time, what characters are good for you really just depends on what characters you have in your account, and kind of just what archetypes you've already invested in. If you have already invested in Finon, then Ceredra would probably be good for your account, even if she is kind of niche right now. Or, for using me as an example, I've invested a lot in, Break and Follow-Up, so I have been trying to get Fugue, so that I can use Remembrance MC with my other teams, and Robin to really just elevate the damage of my follow-up teams, even if I have lost basically every single 50-50 trying to get them. Or if you already have a couple of DPS characters built, you don't really need more of those DPS characters, and should mainly just focus on getting supports to boost those teams, even if some of the new DPS characters like Castris are insanely good. At the end of the day, you should just pull for characters who you want, no matter if it's for meta reasons or just because you like them, no matter how good or bad they are. Which I think kind of leads me to the next thing, 3. I do think tier lists maybe people care a bit too much about meta. I do think I have also kind of done this as well, where I don't think the gap between some characters is as big as people think it is. Are the new characters insanely strong? Yes. Which I don't even think is necessarily a bad thing. It's fine for characters to be strong, because if the new characters weren't strong, the people just wouldn't pull for them, And also it's just fun to play with strong characters. But that doesn't mean everyone else besides them are unplayable. A majority of the characters in the game are good. The only ones that really struggle are just the 1.S characters. But even then, there are a lot of them that are good. Small herd, Ting Yun, Pele, even if Silverwolf is better. I'm sure there's some that I'm not thinking of, but still. Most, if not all of the 2.S characters, besides Misha, but even then he wasn't even good when he came out, are good and can be used to clear most of the content in the game. Now, at the same time, you shouldn't just totally dismiss the meta either, because you're not going to be able to clear content if you don't know how to build teams. Doing that is kind of how you get people saying that, all these characters don't need buffs, they're perfectly fine. Which is just not true at all. There are a lot of characters that need buffs. 3 characters in 1.0 have the exact same trace. It's not hard to see that these characters have problems with their kits. And finally, for what characters are best in the endgame modes, really just depends on what archetypes are being pushed. Break and Follow-Up are not really being pushed anymore, since remember we're not really getting any characters for it. And in any of the endgame modes are mainly favoring more hyper carry style of teams, so they are just so they just aren't as insane as they used to. Which you could say is maybe a good thing, since those archetypes did get kind of oversaturated way too fast, since that's basically all we got in 2.x. But anyway, like, it really just depends on what buffs there are in the modes at the current moment, which, is usually towards the newer characters, and, what enemies there are, since some older characters are way better against some enemies than others. For example, Follow-Up is really good against Hule, especially someone like Yun Li, since she can keep up with how much she attacks, and she can constantly, attack him back. Or even like some of the lower tier characters, not even really having problems with their kits. It's more so that they just don't really have a place right now. Ratio, for example, I don't think there's really much wrong with his kit. He just doesn't have that much in the way of like great supports, since he is Follow-Up, but he also needs debuffs, which is not really that great of a synergy, so there's not that many characters that actually really fit his teams that well, besides like Topaz, and then just generic Follow-Up stuff. I mean, we've seen characters go from not really being that great to being actually having a place, Serval. She went from just being not really having that much of a reason to use her to actually being really good in her teams. At the end of the day, like, tier lists can be helpful to give you a general idea of who is good and who is not. And I think the reason why they are so popular is it is just an easy way to see, like, oh, these characters are higher tier, I should get them. And generally, they do just make good content. But I feel like there's a lot more nuance to it, since like what characters can be higher or lower just really depends on what you have. Which is why I mainly talk about, the characters' kits themselves, since I think that is where a lot of the main problems come from, and why I think we need a lot more buffs. Since we have seen that they can make older characters way better, like, Civil Wolf is now a really good support. Blade does a lot more damage than he did before. I think people would have way less of a problem with the new characters being as strong as they are if we got more buffs to make characters like Sealy or a Welt or a lot of the older 4-stars a lot better, like, Gryphon or Su Shang or those kind of characters. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.